60 years ago, 3 inmates pulled off the impossible. They broke out of the escape-proof Alcatraz federal prison.
Frank Morris, John Anglin, and his brother Clarence.
Alcatraz, often referred to as the Rock, has been called one of the most secure prisons in the world. It housed notorious criminals, including mobsters and violent offenders. Built on a small island surrounded by frigid waters, this maximum security prison was designed to be escape-proof. For years, escape attempts were made, but none succeeded. Until one day, 3 men managed to pull off the impossible. In June 1962, Frank Lee Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin executed a plan that would go down in history. But did they escape? Or did they meet their end in the icy waters of San Francisco Bay? The truth remained hidden for decades. But in 2013, a mysterious letter would reopen this cold case, forcing authorities to reconsider everything they knew about the escape. Could this letter reveal the truth? Or is it just another piece of the puzzle? The 3 men, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, were not just ordinary criminals. They were highly intelligent, resourceful, and determined to escape Alcatraz, a prison that many believed to be completely impenetrable. From the moment they were placed in adjacent cells, they began scheming. Their plan was audacious, but these men were no strangers to crime or clever thinking. Frank Morris, a known escape artist, had already broken out of multiple prisons before arriving at Alcatraz. His reputation as a criminal mastermind had earned him the respect of other inmates. But even Morris knew he couldn't pull this off alone. He needed a team, one that would not only help him escape, but also support him in creating the elaborate decoys and tools necessary for a successful breakout. That's where John and Clarence Anglin came in. Together, they devised a detailed plan. They used their close proximity in the prison to communicate secretly. Their goal? To escape without anyone noticing. They began by meticulously digging through the walls of their cells, all while creating distractions. Their biggest trick? Crafting lifelike dummies to leave in their beds, fooling the guards into thinking they were still asleep. But the dummies alone wouldn't be enough. How did they plan to get past the thick walls and reach the outside? As the trio worked tirelessly to carve out a path to freedom, they realized they would need to create a decoy, a perfect illusion to give them enough time to execute their plan. They couldn't afford to be caught midway through their escape, so they used their ingenuity to craft the most convincing decoys possible. The goal was to fool the guards into believing they were still in their cells, fast asleep, as they sneaked out unnoticed. The materials they had at their disposal were limited, but the men were resourceful. They used items they found in their cells and other areas within the prison: soap, toothpaste, toilet paper, and concrete dust. With these materials, they began building their dummies. It wasn't an easy task. The dummies had to look lifelike from a distance, so the men spent days perfecting their craft. The heads were fashioned from soap and wrapped in toilet paper to create a realistic skin texture. They also took hair clippings from the barber shop and used them to make their dummies' hair look realistic. For the clothing, the men used old prison garments and stuffed them with towels to make the dummies appear human-sized and properly shaped.
But making the dummies wasn't enough. They needed to be positioned in a way that would withstand the scrutiny of the prison guards. The men stuffed the decoys under the blankets in their cells, carefully arranging the bodies so that they seemed like they were still lying in bed. Even the blankets were strategically placed to ensure no one would notice the deception. While the dummies were being readied, the men had already started working on another crucial element: their escape route. How did they plan to get through the solid walls and make their way to freedom? The night of June 11, 1962 had arrived, the night they had been planning for months. Every detail was in place, and now it was time for the men to make their move. While the rest of the prison slept, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers prepared to execute the final phase of their escape. The dummies in their beds were perfectly positioned, and the guards had no reason to suspect anything was amiss. The trio's first obstacle was getting out of their cells without being noticed. The walls they had painstakingly worked on for weeks were now their passage to freedom. The men had chipped away at the concrete using spoons and other small tools they had carefully hidden from the guards. They had also dug through the vents in their cells, creating a small opening large enough for them to squeeze through. Morse and the Anglins carefully crawled through the newly made holes, emerging into a dark, narrow utility corridor that ran behind the prison's walls. From there, the men had to make their way to the roof. Climbing through the ventilation system, they reached a narrow ledge and scrambled up to the top of the prison. Their hearts were pounding as they looked out over the cold, dark waters of the bay. It was their only chance at freedom, but the journey wasn't over yet. As the men made their way to the roof, they faced yet another challenge, the dangerous drop to the ground below. How would they make it across the barbed wire fences and onto the shore? Would they survive the final stretch? Once the men had reached the roof, they faced one of the most dangerous parts of the plan, getting past the barbed wire fences that surrounded Alcatraz. They knew this was a critical point in their escape. Getting caught here would mean certain failure. With careful precision, they crawled through the narrow gaps in the wire, using makeshift tools to cut or bend sections of the fencing. The sharp wire scraped against their skin, but they pushed on, knowing their freedom depended on this final obstacle.
Once through the fence, they descended the final 50 feet to the ground. With adrenaline pumping, they scrambled toward the shore where they had already prepared their raft. This wasn't just any raft. It was a makeshift creation made from over 50 stolen raincoats sewn together. The trio had carefully stitched the pieces together, creating a raft large enough to carry them across the treacherous waters of San Francisco Bay. The cold, dark waters of the bay were their last challenge. With only the moonlight to guide them, they inflated the raft and set off into the unknown. The journey would be perilous. No one had ever escaped Alcatraz and lived to tell the tale. The freezing waters and strong currents posed a deadly threat. But Morris and the Anglins pushed on, the desire for freedom outweighing the fear of the unknown. As they rowed away from the island, they knew the authorities would soon discover their escape. But what they didn't know was that the search would begin almost immediately, and the trail would soon go cold. Could they survive the harsh waters, or would they be caught before they reached safety? The morning after the escape, the alarms went off across Alcatraz. Guards quickly discovered the escape, and the prison was thrown into a frenzy. The dummies in the men's cells had fooled the guards, but as soon as they realized the inmates were gone, the full weight of the escape set in. Immediately, the FBI and San Francisco police launched a full-scale investigation, questioning everyone in the prison and reviewing security footage. The authorities quickly found that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers had planned their escape meticulously. But what happened next would leave everyone baffled. Despite scouring the island and the surrounding waters, no trace of the escapees was found. Even though they had made it out of the prison, the question remained: did they survive the freezing, violent currents of the San Francisco Bay? A report came in from a Norwegian freighter that claimed to have spotted a body floating about 17 miles from the Golden Gate Bridge. The authorities rushed to investigate, but when they arrived, they found no body, just another dead end. The FBI began to believe that the escapees had drowned in the bay, their chances of survival too slim to be realistic. But even though the case seemed closed, new leads kept emerging. A cryptic message from a family member, an odd letter, and sightings that couldn't be explained. Could the men have escaped and lived their lives in hiding? Or had they met their end in those freezing waters? In 2013, more than 50 years after the escape, the San Francisco Police Department received an unexpected letter that would stir the case back to life. The letter was addressed to the police, claiming to be from none other than John Anglin, one of the escapees. In it, the writer confessed to escaping Alcatraz with his brother Clarence and Frank Morris. He revealed details of their life after the escape, including names of places they had lived in and details only someone involved in the escape could know. The letter's contents were shocking, and its arrival sent ripples through the investigation. The letter claimed that John Anglin had survived the escape
and lived under different aliases in various parts of the United States, even mentioning places like Seattle and North Dakota. However, there was something strange about the letter. Despite all the information it contained, the authorities weren't able to verify its authenticity. Was this truly the confession of a man who had managed to escape and stay hidden for decades? Or was it an elaborate hoax? The letter's cryptic message included a troubling claim. John Anglin, now elderly and suffering from cancer, wanted to make a deal with the FBI to avoid jail time in exchange for the truth. However, the authorities could not confirm whether the letter was genuine, and the case was thrown into uncertainty once again.
Could this letter truly be from John Anglin, or was someone simply toying with the FBI? And what other evidence could emerge to finally solve the mystery? The mysterious letter caused a stir within the FBI, and the case was officially reopened. They immediately began analyzing the contents of the letter, carefully examining the handwriting to see if it matched known samples from John Anglin. The FBI also took forensic steps to examine the envelope, looking for any fingerprints or traces of DNA that might confirm the sender's identity. However, their investigation yielded no definitive results. The handwriting analysis didn't provide enough concrete evidence to confirm the letter's authenticity, and the physical evidence was inconclusive. Despite these setbacks, the letter's revelation sparked new theories. Could John Anglin have truly survived and lived out his days in secret? The FBI even considered the possibility that the escapees had managed to stay hidden, living under new identities and avoiding detection for decades. However, they remained cautious, skeptical of the letter's claims, and reluctant to publicly endorse the idea that the escapees had truly gotten away. In the end, the FBI's investigation into the letter did not resolve the case. They could neither confirm nor deny that the letter had been written by John Anglin. The authorities made it clear that without more substantial evidence, they could not move forward with the investigation. But just when it seemed like the case was slipping back into cold territory, another shocking development surfaced, one that would throw everything into doubt once more.
My grandmother received roses for several years after the escape. John and Clarence's signature was on those cards.
In 2015, another bombshell dropped, this time from a family member. Robert Anglin, a relative of the escapees, made a shocking deathbed confession that would shake the investigation to its core. Robert claimed that John and Clarence Anglin had contacted him shortly after their daring escape. According to Robert, the brothers continued to communicate with him for years after their escape, even up until the late 1980s. He remembered receiving letters and postcards from the brothers offering details of their lives in hiding. The revelation was like a spark that reignited the flames of curiosity. Could it be true? Had the Anglin brothers actually survived? Robert claimed the brothers had been living under different names in places far removed from the search efforts. His confession seemed to lend credibility to the theory that the Anglins had successfully evaded capture and lived quietly for decades. But while Robert's confession was compelling, it was also controversial. Could it just be the ramblings of an older man near the end of his life, or was there some truth hidden in his words? As Robert's confession spread, new leads began to surface. A family friend claimed to have seen the Anglin brothers in Brazil in 1975. Was this the final piece of the puzzle, or was it another false trail? Despite the many revelations and leads that have emerged over the years, the fate of Frank Lee Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin remains unresolved. The deathbed confession, along with the mysterious letter, suggests that the escapees may have lived long after their breakout. But even as more pieces of evidence continue to surface, no one can definitively say what really happened. The FBI has closed the case, but the uncertainty remains. One intriguing theory is that the trio may have survived thanks to the tides and currents of the San Francisco Bay. Researchers even used computer models to simulate the escape, and the results suggested that the currents could have worked in their favor, giving them a small chance of surviving the treacherous waters. Yet, no solid proof exists to confirm this. In 2018, the FBI quietly acknowledged that the case may never be solved. But with the letter and confession still hanging in the air, the questions persist. Could the men have truly escaped and lived their lives in secret? Or did they perish in the icy waters, just as the authorities had concluded decades ago? The world may never know for sure.
For now, the case of the Alcatraz escape remains one of America's most captivating mysteries, one that still challenges our beliefs about what's possible. The truth might still be out there, but is anyone looking for it anymore?